My son Charles was the funniest, most popular kid in school. Yet the funniest, most popular kid in school suffered from depression and became addicted to heroin and died by suicide 5 years ago. Charles was this effervescent and fun child, and when he entered a room, all heads would turn in his direction like he came in carrying sunshine in his pocket and he was there to hand it out. He was a creative genius and he saw the world from an entirely different view from everyone. And I remember that he would make us laugh so hard that we would have to grip the sides of our chairs so that we wouldn't topple over. And of all the things about him, I miss his hug and I miss the way he made me laugh. And I remember for fifth grade graduation, Charles decided that he wasn't going to wear the standard issue blue blazer and khakis. And he comes home one day and he goes, Mom, I want to wear a white tuxedo. And I'm like, where? And, I'm a mom and I should. And so I'm like, oh, that's great. And then I've got to figure out where to get this white tuxedo. So there isn't one even to rent. And at the time, we didn't have $100 to rent one anyway. So I went on eBay and I ordered one and it came and, he had a rail thin body. Charles was 6'2" and 130 pounds when he died. And he was always very, very thin. But a little bit of creative sewing made that tuxedo presentable enough. He loved it. Oh my gosh. And he wore it for years and years and years. It was in the toy box and the play box. It was in YouTube videos. Of course, it was at graduation. But that was Charles. I mean, he just embraced different. And then long about high school, we see a change in Charles. And there's a drinking incident. And I'm starting to become a little suspicious because his behavior has changed, but not enough in an alarming way that everybody else noticed it. But I just had this odd feeling that things weren't going well for him. But I didn't see any indication like in his grades or his behavior. It was just that gut mama feeling. So he was chosen on homecoming court. And that was such a proud mama moment that day because he was a sophomore and my older son was chosen and he actually won. And I was escorting him and Charles was escorted by his favorite teacher, Miss Fretwell. And I remember them walking across the field and he's making her laugh so hard. They can barely walk, they're laughing so hard. But it wasn't long after that wonderful mama moment that his drug use started to escalate. And I did find out that he was smoking pot on a daily basis to manage feelings of depression and anxiety. And we'd been to mental health professionals, but pretty much all they did was say, well, he was high risk, and they never really gave us anything to work with. And more than that, they never gave us a diagnosis. I kept saying, I would like to have a diagnosis. And they would give us medication, some of which I have learned since then should never have been prescribed to an adolescent. So that drug use starts to escalate and he starts taking larger and larger risks. And I didn't know at the time that those risks, when people do that risk taking, it indicates, that it could be that child suffers from depression. But, that didn't occur to me. I've got the funniest, most popular kid in school, right? So I'm not thinking that, there's this huge problem until his counselor, our counselor calls me and he had overheard from the grapevine that my son was taking some very frightening party drugs. And a lot of kids had dropped dead within 30 minutes of taking this drug. And it's called 2CE. I'd never heard of it. And he advised us that we should send him to a wilderness program. And you don't send your kid to a wilderness program because you've caught your kid with a beer and a joint. You do this because you think your child's life is truly at risk. He didn't love a wilderness, and he didn't like to be kidnapped out of his bed and taken there. And we as parents felt terribly guilty for exposing our child to yet another trauma. But I was caught between a rock and a hard place. Do we just wait till he gets addicted to something, or should we do something now and hope that, you know, things might change, that this whole process would change the way he was acting? So one thing I've really loved about Wilderness is that they gave us a diagnosis, and a very thorough one. So he was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and something I had never heard of, cannabis dependence. So I was like, what is that? And then the counselor described it as he was self-medicating his way through his mental illnesses. So, you know, he wasn't going to take any of the traditional medication. And, you know, I'm getting the story of, oh, it's all natural and all these other things aren't all natural. I'm like, well, arsenic is natural and we don't take that, right? But, you know, he's not going to listen to me. And besides, he's in Wilderness and he's far away from any cannabis plants there, that's for sure. He was very far away from his iPod, which he wasn't thrilled about. So from there, he goes to therapeutic boarding school. And it was recommended. And I have to tell you that we didn't have a boarding school bank account, but our home equity line did. So he comes back in 2014, having spent some 22 months outside our home in some kind of placement. We're exhausted. He's exhausted because wherever he was, we needed to go up there and have family work. We did a couple of Skypes, but it was always better if we went in person. So, you know, we would drive 12 hours to wherever, you know, his placement was, or fly there, and we would do the family work. Unfortunately, when he came home, he went back to the same coping strategies that he had used before, which is drugs and alcohol. And unfortunately, that gateway, he, you know, started with the marijuana again and the alcohol, and then he tried heroin, and he felt like a king. And to a child who had struggled with thoughts of suicide for many years, and I didn't know that he ever had, he felt like a king, and he thought, how could this be wrong? And I'll never get addicted. You know, that's what his teenage brain was telling him. And he did become addicted, unfortunately. And it was when my husband and I were sitting in the back of a police car in a parking lot that they delivered the news that our son had died. And at first, I mean, we're wailing and screaming, and you know the reaction. And my husband takes a break and he says, well, how did he die? And I remember thinking, that is such a crazy question. How do you think he died? He was addicted to heroin, for goodness sakes. And the officer said it was a suicide and the method left no question. And I can't even breathe. I can't even fathom that the funniest, most popular kid in school would kill himself. And my first thought was, how could I be such a crummy mother that my child would check out on me? But it wasn't about me. And it took me a really long time to understand suicide, and that they don't do the drugs and alcohol to get at us. They do them because they're trying to numb the pain. It's really the result of a couple of things. One is underdeveloped coping skills. The other is just family history. So they're just kids who are more predisposed to substance use disorder or substance misuse than others are. So we come home, we collapse. on the floor in a pile of pain. The dog jumps in the middle. And I'm like, I'll just never survive this. I'll never survive this. And then I stopped myself because I've always had this habit that if I say why me, I have to say why not me. And so I said I'd never survive, so I have to do the opposite. So I said, I will survive. I don't know how, I don't know what it looks like, but other people have, and I'll figure it out. But my struggle was making it from 1 minute to the next and 1 hour to the next, especially that first week. And then I told myself, as bad as it hurts right now, and it was brutal, it will never be as bad as when I got the news that part is over. I survived that. And if I can survive that, I can survive anything. And that was kind of the first time. This was really my first real introduction to grief. I didn't know what this looked like. I didn't want to do it. That first thing is, I just want to reverse all this. I don't want to go there. I don't want to do it. But you have to have that radical acceptance of, okay, I do have to do this. It's coming at me whether I want it to or not. And we had the memorial service, which was beautiful. My friends were very supportive, but after the memorial service, it was kind of like everybody disappeared. And I'm like, why isn't anyone calling me or inviting me anywhere? Even if I would say no, and then I would talk about it. And they would cut me off mid-sentence. And I'd be like, I didn't erase him from my family tree. But I felt invalidated. And I thought, you know what? We need to be talking about these subjects. And I think the fact that it was loss of a child was one thing. But then there was the substance misuse and the suicide. There was just so much stigma that no one wanted to say anything at all. So I said, I'm going on the offensive. And I'm going to write an article for the newspaper. So I called up the newspaper and they agreed. And I wrote an article. And it took me 5 months to write 1,200 words. And that whole process was about working through all those initial emotions, one of which was anger. I wasn't angry at him. His brother was. His brother was really angry with Charles. And I accept that and understand that as a normal grief emotion. But I was angry at the world. I was angry at the therapist. I was angry at heroin. I was angry at all drugs. I was just angry. And I write. And I remember closing it one day and then coming back the next day and opening it up and reading it. And I died laughing because it was such an angry manifesto. And I guess I didn't really understand how absolutely burning with rage I was until I gave that article a few days to sit and reopened it. But the beautiful thing about writing was that paper didn't spit back at me or cuss me out or tell me I couldn't say any of those things. Instead, it called my name and asked me to write on that article over and over and over. So I edited it, of course, but it helped me work through so many of those early emotions. So I sent it to the newspaper and they, oh, what a great feeling. And then they call me to tell me it's going to publish. And I am terrified. I am so terrified because I've told my whole family story. And in 2015, that wasn't typical. And they were going to publish it. And no one knew. I mean, my husband didn't know. My mother didn't know it's going to be on the front page of the Sunday paper. And I thought, you know what? I don't need to worry about this because nobody's going to read it anyway. Nobody wanted to talk about him after he died. Surely nobody's going to care now. and it went viral. And I was shocked. And the part about that was so interesting is that other people were reading their story in mine. And so there were thousands of comments from people all over the world. And for the first time, I felt connected and I didn't feel alone. Now, I will say up to this point, I had started doing a support group, which was a huge part of my healing journey. But when you see thousands and thousands of stories, you just really start to recognize how prevalent this is. And that gave me yet another idea. And I started a blog called Emotionally Naked to find healing through writing and shine a spotlight on the taboo topics of mental illness, addiction, substance misuse, suicide, and grief. And I wanted it to be a place of honesty and vulnerability. And one day we were looking at the grief anniversary and I was struggling. It was the first one. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And I just got gripped and I sat down and I wrote a piece called The Final 48 Hours. And I published it, but I remember my finger hovering going, how could I share all my ugly, naked mama grief with the world? I mean, you know, I'm being mean to people or I'm asking for pity. But I had been sharing and I promised to do it and I did, but I didn't share it on social media, but all my subscribers did. And I couldn't really fathom why hundreds of thousands of people were coming to the site to read it. And then I got a message from a girl named Lauren that said, 2 days ago, I thought about taking my life. Reading a post from a mother who's felt such devastating pain has changed my perspective on life. And I was just shocked. And I said, that's why I wrote it. I didn't know until I got that note. And that was a big, big turning point for me because number one, it was the first time I recognized that people who have thoughts of suicide do want to tell. And maybe this was a platform where they could do that safely. And while I didn't save her life, I feel like I'm part of that narrative and that success, and that it just validated her wish to tell. And I felt really good about that. And it really kind of pushed me more in this direction. And I sold my digital marketing business. And I decided to do something completely different, which was terrifying, but also freeing at the same time because I was following my passion. And you know, Charles was always a kid to follow his heart. And I felt the universe was pulling me in that direction. So how did I survive? Well, the support group was a big part of it because of that shared experience. Really, really important. And that's where I learned that it was okay to be angry. It was okay to feel relief because when you have a child who misuses substances and then they die, you're sad, but there's also a sense of relief too, because for the first time you have some peace in years. And then you feel guilty on top of feeling that sense of peace. It is just so complicated. And then the coulda, woulda, shouldas. And I had to figure out this rhythm of this mess of emotions I was constantly feeling. And I just kept telling myself, I will figure this out. I will figure this out. And I looked to other people who had been through this before. So I did the support group and I wrote. So I've written a book, I've written a second book, and I've written 1,800 posts on my blog. I've written probably 30 or 40 articles. On top of that, I've done 100 podcasts, 200 speeches, visits with support groups, another 100. All of that feels like giving back. And when I'm giving back, I'm healing. And that process is ongoing. So I'm almost 6 years out now, but that healing continues and will always continue. Exercise was another big thing for me. And I have since found out that actually extreme exercise for 20 minutes or more really is a scientifically proven coping strategy. So I would go out there and run 4 miles. And I remember the winter after Charles died, it was 12 degrees and I would still get out there and run every day. And I mean, my legs felt like lead and I didn't do it beautifully, that's for sure. But by the end of that run, I felt such a release and a relief. And I remember my eyelashes would freeze because I would be crying at the beginning. But by the end, I usually felt better. And I made myself get out there every day. And it was so hard. But I remembered the reward I got from it when I did. So what I started to recognize is that I was kind of building a whole toolbox of coping strategies that work for me. The writing, the running, the support group. And then I made another pledge to myself. And I made the decision that I would no longer drink. I wasn't a big drinker, but I felt like if I got into the glass of wine every night, I might get into this slippery slope. Substances had been part of the reason that Charles died by suicide, and I didn't want to make it part of the reason that I got stuck in grief. And I made it temporary, but I've just never gone back to it. And the quality of my sleep improved, and a lot of other things felt like it improved when I took that step. That was another tool in my toolbox. I also needed to recognize that my family was in a different place at any given time than where I might be. And they might answer differently than I answered the question, how many children do you have? Or how many brothers and sisters do you have? So I remember right from the beginning, I wanted to answer it when people would say, well, how many children do you have? And I'd say, well, my oldest son is living his dream as a filmmaker in LA. And my youngest suffered from depression and addiction and died by suicide. And the first time was hard and it did suck all the air out of the room. But the more I said it, the more I got comfortable with it. And the more I got comfortable with it, the more the people that I said that in front of became comfortable with it. So, I mean, even today, if I'm in Lowe's or the supermarket, somebody says, how many kids do you have? That's how I answer. And I answer and I say it in a way that invites them to tell me their story, which they almost always do. Now, my husband isn't comfortable with that answer. And I had to accept that he was going to answer it a different way. And then my oldest son, Richard, who's a suicide loss survivor, a sibling loss survivor, he answered it differently. So I remember he said he was in LA and somebody that he met said, so how many brothers and sisters do you have? And he said, I don't have any. And she goes, oh, so you're an only child? And he goes, no, I'm not an only child. And I remember thinking when he told me, she must think you are such a mystery man. But, you know, it evolves over time. How you answer that question has changed for my husband. My son has changed how he answers it. And I've just had to accept where they are and meet them where they are in their grief journey at any given time. I've also had to understand that loss of a child rewrites your address book. So there have been people that I had in my life, two I can think of right off the bat, and that I've never heard from since. As soon as my son died, they disappeared from the face of the earth like I never existed. And at first, I took that personally. And then I learned that, you know what? I can't worry about that. It's not me, that's them. And then I struggled with the fact that why aren't my friends calling me more? Why aren't they asking me to things? And then it dawned on me, I don't think they know. They don't have anyone that's ever been through this. And so I sat down with one friend and I talked to this person and I said, this is what I'm looking for. I want to be invited to things. I want to talk about my child. I don't need an hour. I need 2 or 3 minutes. And then I can talk about other things and I can enjoy the evening. Because when I was cut off, it made me angry and I would just get up and leave. And so they recognized that something was the matter. And when I told this one friend, she went and told everybody else. And it dawned on me, oh my gosh, why would I think that they would read my mind? Would I know if the situation were switched? So I actually created a worksheet that I have as part of, I've got a little coping strategies for grief and loss. It's a free ebook. And I have a worksheet in there and you can download the worksheet too. And it'll also kind of give you a checklist of things to talk with friends about, so they can be more intentional in how they support you, because otherwise they're going to say something like, well, call if you need anything. And here you are raw in grief. You have no idea what you need. But we do have needs. We still have to get groceries. We still have to pick up prescriptions. We still have to mow our yard. And when you've lost something that's so precious in your life, you can't even figure out how to get up and take a shower, much less get all those normal routine things done. Another thing I did to help me, when I woke up, I thought of something I was grateful for every day. Now, I remember a friend of mine at Families Anonymous saying, you should write down 5 things you're grateful for. I could barely walk in the shower and turn it on. There was no way I was going to think of 5. So I thought of 1. I did not do this well for the first week. I remember the first one that I came up with was, I'm so glad Charles wasn't killed by a serial killer. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? So I got better at it. I just kept at it. And after about 5 days, I got into a rhythm and it kind of set the intention for the day. So if I got into one of these really, really difficult emotional moments, you know how it comes on in waves, I would accept the wave and feel the feelings. And then once, I felt like it would start to lift, I would remind myself of what I was grateful for, what I had said that morning, if I could remember it. I also want everyone to know that your relationship with your beloved dead changes and evolves over time. And that sometimes people have objections to that, like the fact that, 15 years later, you might go visit the tombstone or still talk about your child. Sometimes that makes people uncomfortable and they say things and they've never been through this. And I think that we just have to understand that it's not that they're being cruel, it's just that they just don't know. And again, that's an opportunity for conversation. And I'm not going to let somebody grief shame me out of out of my opportunity to talk about my child, because I'm going to talk about my dead child as long as anybody else is talking about their living ones. And I talk about my living one too, of course. So grief and I have gone from knowing each other not at all to knowing each other really well. And it took me a while to kind of learn that I would walk beside grief every day of my life. And that it was really about incorporating it in a way that we could live together. And at first it was this ugly, nasty, awful thing that kept me pinned to my mattress and begging, please, let me have a good day, to this beautiful thing that became the only link to the one I love. And now when I get those grief moments, I'll run, kind of go cuddle up with it, because I know it is the only tie I have to the one that I love. And that's important to me. And the most painful is the ache and the, wanting one more hug and figuring out that that relationship with my loved one is different now. And yeah, I talk through the air. Thank goodness for earbuds, because it just looks like I'm on the phone. But I asked Charles's opinion. I talked to him. I asked for signs. And if that makes me feel better, why not? So I'm going to kind of wrap this up with a story. And I had this project right when I started my blog called the Grief Heart Project. And every day I would post a heart when that sort of represented how I felt. And what was fun about it is everybody started like sending me hearts, and they were things that they would see in nature. So one day, my cousin and I are in the car, and we're driving down the street, and there had just been a huge storm in Richmond, and it had damaged a lot of trees. And we both catch sight of this tree, and we both scream, "Grief heart," at the same time. And we had to go around and go back and go take a look at it. So we parked and we walk up, and there's this tree. So there's this whole grove of trees. And in the middle is one that's been singed by lightning. And it is black, and it has like 2 limbs left, and I think it had 3 leaves. But at the top is a formation of a heart like this. So what happened was the lightning came down and split the top, and it made a heart at the top. I had to take a picture. I called it Stormy Heart. Fast forward 2 years later, I'm walking by this grove of trees on the way to a festival in the park. And I tell my husband, I want to go see my grief heart tree. Well, I go up to it, and first I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gone. They chopped it down, and I didn't even know. But then when I walked up, I look underneath, and I see the heart, and I see the black singed trunk where it had been damaged years ago. But it had fought back that spring. And although, a bit rangy in terms of symmetry, it was flourishing. And that's what I want you to know. Is as difficult as things are, new life will surround that pain, and that wound will still be there, but you will be stronger, and you can survive, just like that tree. And I feel at one with this tree because of it. But I was just, when I saw it flourish, I just felt like that's what had happened to me. 2 years later, I was finding my way through this grief journey, and I was learning to live again and laugh again and learning to walk with grief in my life.